Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our garden in Spokane, Washington, where the hardiness zone ranges from 5B to 6A. How's your vegetable garden coming along so far? Ours is generally doing well, but we've had a few issues come up, and I was thinking it might be helpful to share those with you and also to show you how I approach problems that can come up in the garden. So let's visit some different areas of the garden today. Now, as we get underway today, I wanted to remind you of my most important gardening tip, and that is to monitor your garden on a regular basis and daily if you can, because you'll catch problems right as they're starting and have far more options for dealing with them. So always monitor your garden. The first problem centers around our famous pole bean arbor. And I say famous because way back in 2008, I bought 4 trellises at our local Kroger's garden center and created a pole bean arbor. And the reason it's famous is because I shot a video on how to grow pole beans and mentioned this arbor. And people have absolutely loved that video. So far, almost 1 million people have viewed the video, which is crazy. But let me show you what has happened to a few of our pole bean seedlings, which is very worrisome. Now, it might be a little hard for you to see this, but the other day I was checking on the bean plants and I started seeing holes in the leaves. And not just a few holes, but quite a bit. And this pattern of chewing is known as skeletonizing. And I immediately thought, earwigs. And it just so happens that they love beans. So that is annoying, and they have caused damage to these first 5 bean seedlings. Now it just so happens that I had wrapped this planting and the one in the other bed with some floating row cover to protect the seedlings from our crazy temperature extremes. And I had placed this board on the end to hold down the floating row cover so it wouldn't blow off. Well, this is of significance because earwigs are nocturnal and they like to hide under things during the day, such as boards. So I removed this and I did not see any earwigs, but that is really what I'm suspecting. The next thing I did is I sprayed the leaves and the stems of the bean seedlings with an organic spray that contains the active ingredient of spinosad. Now, spinosad is actually a fermented soil bacteria. How weird is that? But the product that it's in is called Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. They must have had a lot of fun coming up with that name. But I have not seen any more damage, and you better believe I'm keeping a very close eye on the plants. And this is one of those instances where monitoring the garden regularly will nip problems right in the bud. Now I have 2 last things I want to mention about earwigs. Occasionally they seem to have a crazy population boom and they just are devouring everything in sight. If you're dealing with that in your garden, there is a very simple organic trap that you can make that is incredibly successful at controlling them. So you just need a container that has a snap-on lid, and you want to punch 1/4 inch diameter or slightly larger holes in the lid. You want to sink the bottom part of the container into the soil so that the lip of the container is even with the soil surface. Pour in some cheap vegetable oil up to about 3/4 of an inch below the lip and put in a splash of soy sauce. That will attract the earwigs. Put the lid back on and they will smell the soy sauce, crawl through the holes, fall in, and drown. And I know that doesn't sound very nice, but if you're dealing with a ton of earwigs, that is a great solution. I've used it here in our garden on those types of years, and it works great. Now, all of that said, I have to tell you something that you probably won't believe. Earwigs are actually considered a beneficial insect. Yeah, I know. Apparently, they are great predators of aphids. So if you're having a lot of problems with aphids in your garden, now you've got a dilemma. But I just wanted to pass that along because sometimes it's easy for us gardeners to think, okay, this is a bad insect and it does not have any important purpose on this planet. But apparently earwigs do. The other insect problem that I recently encountered has to do with our cauliflower bed. And you'll recall that I have a layer of agricultural insect netting on hoops over the bed, and that's to keep cabbage butterflies and moths away and aphids. But slugs are a problem, and I'll show you what I've been using and why it failed for one plant. So I think you can see this little seedling pretty well, and you'll notice that there is damage on the leaves, and that is typical slug damage. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I have these little plastic 3-inch drain pipe rings that have copper tape affixed to the outside, and that works beautifully for keeping slugs away because the skin and antenna of slugs reacts electrically with copper. And in theory, this should work fine because as long as the plants are vertical and the leaves are not touching the soil surface, the slugs can't get to them because this is an actual barrier. And you probably can see I've got little supports in here. But the other day, apparently in the wind, it had slipped past the edge of one of these supports and was leaning over, touching the soil. And I like to call that a slug on-ramp because that's a very easy way for them to still get to the plants, but not have anything to do with the copper. The other cauliflower plants are doing great because their leaves are not touching the soil surface. And I did have somebody ask me the other day, how often do you have to replace the copper tape? Well, believe it or not, we have not had to replace it at all, and we made these rings 5 years ago. So that tells you how long it stays good. You don't have to clean it off or anything. It's still effective. Now this is our fava bean bed, and you can see the plants are growing really nicely. But this bed also illustrates a very important point I want to make. Do you see the weeds in there? Yeah. It's so important that we all keep up with the weeds in our garden because weeds compete with our plants for moisture, nutrients, and space. And if they're struggling because of the weeds, that is not a good thing. So I need to weed this bed, which I'm going to do right now. And I like to do hand weeding, to be honest, but you could certainly use a hoe. Fortunately, these weeds come up super easily. Okay, that looks a whole lot better, and I'll bet the plants are happier to have more room. Now, what about protecting young plants from different kinds of critters? In our garden, the biggest problem is California quail. They are beautiful birds. We love watching them. They have brand new chicks as of yesterday, and so they're a joy to see. But boy, do they like nibbling on freshly sprouted seeds and young seedlings. So this is our carrot bed. You can see the plants are doing great. And initially I covered them with hoops and floating row cover just to give them a break from the birds. And that has worked really well. Now that they're up a few inches, I decided it was time to remove the floating row cover because carrots are technically a cool season crop, and I didn't think they'd appreciate the extra warmth under the floating row cover. But I was still worried that maybe the plants were still small enough that the birds might peck on them. So I have a couple of interesting ways to keep them away from plants. And in this case, I've got two things that work. I put floating row cover in the pathway around the bed because the quail don't like to walk on it, so that is good. You'll also notice my friend here, Wile E. Coyote. He is a coyote decoy, and in theory, he should scare the birds away. They're pretty much used to him, but I decided to put him on duty here just in the hopes of giving the birds a little bit of a shock and deciding, okay, we don't want to walk on the floating row cover and we don't want anything to do with him. More than anything, he just adds a little character to the garden. Now let me show you two more ways that I keep the birds away. This is a chicken wire cloche or bell that I've put over a marigold seedling, and the quail love to nibble on marigolds. I'm just shocked that they do. And so I decided to take the three that I have and put them over the three best plants. But I also have a way of keeping them from pecking on the leaves. Or maybe I should say two ways. This is a toy snake from the dollar store, and that has worked pretty well at keeping the birds away. And then this poor little seedling was getting nibbled on, and so I took some branches and just cut them up and made a little teepee form around it so that it's harder for them to get their heads in there to peck on the leaves. And I think I probably need one more right there. Now, if you are growing some cool season crops and your weather has gotten quite warm like ours has, chances are you're going to start seeing this. This is called bolting to seed, and this is a pak choi. They do not like warm weather at all. And what happens when a plant is stressed for any number of reasons, but including hot weather, they will send up a stalk and they want to bloom and set seed, and then they're going to die. So it's a way of perpetuating their species, but they just do not like the heat. Other things that can cause this would include stresses like not enough water, not giving them enough room to grow, and so on. So my advice to you is to pick your edible stuff as early as possible before they get too bitter, because that's what's going to happen with the leaves due to bolting. In the hoop house, I'm growing my Supremo paste tomatoes, and they are doing really, really well. But there's two really important things to remember when growing tomatoes. First of all, be sure to provide them with some kind of support because they are going to need it. Don't use those short, flimsy plant cages that they sell in some garden centers, because they will fall over as soon as the plants get a little top heavy, and then you've really got a problem. The other thing with tomatoes is that you do not want the lowest leaves to touch the soil surface. Now, I've got mulch here, but I still remember this important rule. You want to remove the lowest branches on tomato plants that are close to touching the soil. That way, pathogens in the soil will find it much harder to infect a plant. So be sure to check on your tomato plants every now and then and remove those lowest branches that are touching the ground or about to touch the ground, preferably before they touch. This is one of Bill's pepper beds, and if you notice that some of your plants are wilting a bit, consider covering the surface of the soil with a mulch to help the soil retain its moisture. We use grass clippings from our lawn because we don't use herbicides like weed and feed on it. And be sure to monitor the moisture in the soil, because as the summer temperatures heat up, you'll need to increase the amount of water your garden gets. So I'm going to go ahead and put some grass clippings on the surface of this bed. Thanks so much for joining me out in the garden today, everybody. Happy gardening!